Today on The State of Us, what is the debt ceiling fight really about, and could the 14th Amendment fix it? Hard right Republicans have fueled the debt ceiling standoff by demanding deep spending cuts as the price of averting a default, and they are all but certain to oppose any compromise. Democrats, for their part, are also causing problems by saying that the president shouldn't budge on any negotiations. We know the debt ceiling fight's been brewing now for a while. There's also been suggestions that maybe the president can just fix all this without Congress by using the 14th Amendment. We've got a lot to talk about today, and we're going to get started. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson.
So much crap, so little time. Here we go. Talking about the politicians, not the show.
Yes.
My gosh. I mean, come on. We all know you've got to pass something, okay? Quit the posturing.
Do we know that?
Well, no, you don't have to.
You
don't
right. have to. We can see what happens.
We don't have to, but
things that get interesting.
Well, and they would be both guaranteed to lose their jobs.
Ah, yes.
Which they neither one want, because all the posturing is being done so that they continue to get support from the people who support them. So maybe we do want it to default so that we could get a brand new set of congressional people so that they would finally work for the American people. How's that?
So maybe we should start, Lance, with, we maybe don't want to assume that everybody listening really knows what the debt ceiling is. I think we've talked about this every time we've talked about the debt ceiling, of understanding what it is. Because did you know?
Is it really a ceiling? Because you can constantly move it higher.
Well, we can raise the roof.
Can we?
Well, we can.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of expensive to do that.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, right, historically, the debt ceiling's not always existed, because what it is, basically, is it's a limit that Congress created on the amount of debt that we, as the United States, can incur. That's all it is. It's a law, basically, that Congress put in place and said the United States cannot borrow more than X amount of money. That's it. That's what the debt ceiling is. Essentially, it is an artificial limit on how much money the United States can borrow. And you say, well, why does that matter if it's an artificial limit? Well, the reason is because by law, because Congress makes laws, right? The notion is that if we hit the debt ceiling, then we are unable, it is illegal for the executive branch, right, the Treasury Secretary, to continue paying our bills. So the only option at that point is for the Treasury Secretary, to cease paying the United States obligations, which you might say, well, internally, how much does that matter? Well, we're going to upset some companies in the United States who have contracts with the government, right, who want to get paid. So that's a problem. But more than that, it's internationally. We've borrowed money as a country from other countries. And the minute that we decide not to pay those countries, they're probably going to be upset about that.
But doesn't it also, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but all those government workers that send out Social Security checks and veterans checks and work at VA hospitals.
They keep the government running.
They don't get paid, so they don't go to work. So then people eventually would stop getting their Social Security check or their retirement check from the military, because those people that produce those checks and send them out would no longer be getting paid, so they would no longer be going to work, and so those checks would not be sent out.
Well, part of the problem, and we've talked about this, because people say, well, so is the debt ceiling and the deficit the same thing? No, they're not the same.
That's not the same.
Right. The debt ceiling is the limit on what we can borrow. The deficit is how much we actually owe.
Right.
Well, actually, the debt is how much we actually owe. The deficit is the difference between what we bring in tax revenue and what we spend. And we deficit spend as a country right now, which means that we're spending every day more money than the United States brings in. We're spending more money than we have. So if we're spending more money than we have, the only way to get more money than you have is to borrow it, which is why the debt ceiling matters. Because what Lance is talking about is we can't keep the government open if we're not borrowing money. So what happens if we can't borrow any more money? If we hit the debt ceiling, we cannot borrow any more money. So then all these people can't get paid, so they're not going to work. 1939 is when the debt ceiling was officially put in place, and reaction to, you know, what was happening with the Great Depression and wars, and we were spending lots of money. And the thinking was that, you know, we don't want Congress to be able to just forever say we're going to deficit spend. So we'll create this debt ceiling. And what that will do is prevent us from, you know, just borrowing to infinitum and never being
And
worried
when the
about
Depression's over and when the war is over,
we'll get it all.
We'll get rid of it all,
Yeah,
and
we'll
we'll
pay
go
it
back to
down
the
and-
way it used to be.
Right.
And we didn't do that.
No, we didn't. We didn't do that.
Because, hey, we found a way where we can offer people more things without having to make them pay for it. And that will help us get reelected. So we'll just keep this debt and this debt ceiling, which isn't really true either, because we did have enough taxes back after World War II that we did pay for the war, and we did have a surplus for a while.
Mm-hmm. So it can be done, right? I mean, there is another way that we've done it, but the thing that they found out, and that's, I think, the key to understanding this whole thing, is that, well, why is it bad if we owe people money? And theoretically, I mean, because again, as somebody who runs a business and borrows lots of money and owes lots of money to lots of people.
Yeah, I don't know how you sleep at night.
Well, I
Because
don't.
I can't owe people money.
That's the secret. You just don't sleep.
I
and then you
cannot
don't have to worry about it.
stand to owe people money. It just crawls all over my skin.
I don't like it either. I try not to think about it too much.
All right.
But here's what's changed, folks, because you might, you know, why is it now worse than it was, right? Because we've been borrowing money for, you know, almost, we've had a debt ceiling going on, what, 80 years, you know, and so why is it now more of a problem? Well, politics has become more involved because routinely we raise the debt ceiling without an issue. And the other reason, and this is a huge one, gross domestic product, right? We've talked about that.
The GDP.
The GDP. The value of, and this is, again, if economists are listening, forgive me, the collective value, right, of what the United States is producing, the gross domestic product. Historically speaking, let's go back to 1960. The federal debt percentage of GDP, in other words, how much debt did we have relative to how much we produced, was 52.86%. That means that we were, generally speaking, right, producing almost twice what our debt was.
Right.
So generally, everybody felt like that's pretty safe because we're producing a lot more than we owe. So do we owe money? Yes. But are we able to make those payments? And eventually, should we be able to actually pay them off? Yeah, that was kind of, right, the super simple thinking.
Sure.
Fast forward to 1980, GDP's at 34.59%. So we've
gotten better.
We're getting better, you know, so this theory must work. Well, then a number of things took place in the 1980s under, you know, certain presidents. And then we also got engaged in some more foreign conflicts starting in the 90s. And you look at 2000, we were at 57.84% of GDP. Still really not that terrible.
Pretty close to the 1960 number.
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, yeah, a little bit more, but not crazy. Of course, today, 120.47% of GDP. So how do we come up with that? Well, simple math equation, right? The U.S. national debt as of the time of recording this show is $31.8 trillion. Our U.S. gross domestic product is $26.39 trillion. And one of the problems, right, with debt, and particularly with deficit spending, is the snowball effect. And this is where, again, helping understand why this has become such an issue, what are the 4 largest budget items in the U.S. federal budget? You want to take any guesses, Lance? We're talking about all spending, mandatory and discretionary. So all of it together. What would you guess?
Defense is one.
Okay, defense.
Interest on the debt is another one.
We got 2 of them. And then
I'm stuck.
Well, what are our 2 big mandatory spenders?
Oh, Social Security.
Uh-huh.
So it's not just entitlement programs?
No.
It's just Social Security.
Social Security and Medicare. Medicare/Medicaid, because they're part of the same
Gotcha.
budget item. So the largest single budget item that the United States has is Medicare and Medicaid, followed by Social Security. Those both are what we've talked about before, which are mandatory spending. Well, you say, what do you mean? Well, when Congress is debating the debt, right, every year, we've talked about this, or the budget, when they're debating the budget every year, they're debating roughly 20% of all the money we spend.
Because 80% of the budget
is obligated
to pay.
Right. It's obligated to two big things: entitlements, which is Medicare and Social Security, and our interest on the debt.
Right.
Right. Which, by the way, if you ever look up usdebtclock.org, it's super fun because you can watch the interest on the debt.
Is it fun?
Well, I was being a little facetious there. You can watch the interest on the debt go up. And just in the last 5 seconds that I've been speaking, the interest on the debt has gone up more than all the money I've made in my entire life.
Yep.
So and that's the interest, right? That's not what we're borrowing. Because if we look at that number is hard to even
Well, it's really
watch.
simple, right? We have Americans today have more credit card debt per average than ever before.
You don't even want to get into that.
I think it averages out to like
your heart if we
$6,000 per American, right? And think about what your interest is on your credit card. And, you look at that little box that says, if you make the minimum payment, it's going to take you this long to pay it off. And this is how much you'll pay for it. That's what we've done exponentially as a country. Is that a pretty simple way for the average person to understand it? And you have a credit limit on your credit card. So, I mean, for those of you who are like, oh, this is way above my pay grade, that's basically what's going on here, is that the United States has spent its credit limit and is now asking itself to raise its own credit limit.
Right. It'd be like if you had a credit card from somebody else and you got to decide when to raise So now when we give that explanation, Lance, here's the thing that I think comes to a lot of people's minds. Well, then we shouldn't raise the debt ceiling, right? Because it sounds like that's a stupid idea, because what happens is we just keep raising it and raising it and raising it.
I'm going to get further and further in debt.
And further and further in debt. That's all that happens. Well, that's part of what we're going to talk about. Why is raising the debt ceiling separate from tackling the debt? Should they be one and the same thing? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. For almost as long as we've been doing this show, we've been talking about the national debt. And we've been talking about the debt ceiling. And we've been talking about deficit spending, all these super fun things. Now, we talked about U.S. gross domestic product versus our spending, right? The deficit. So that is of concern, right? 120% is our debt versus, GDP. So that's, frightening. However, the thing that I've always said that I personally like to pay more attention to is our U.S. total national assets, right, versus our total liability, okay? This is the number to me that should be the scariest to everybody, because this is the bottom line of what does the U.S. own, right, versus what is it liable for? And this is, in private business, a very simple measure of your net worth. How much are you worth? Everything that you...
How much are you worth and how much do you owe?
All of your assets minus all of your liabilities. And you want that to be a positive number, right?
Right.
Because if it's a negative number, that means that all of your liabilities are more than everything that you own. Our assets per citizen, because I think this is the easiest way to make it a little more real for people. Our assets per citizen, this is all household assets, so everything that every person in the United States owns, plus everything that the U.S. federal government, right, and all of its subsidiary organizations own. Assets per citizen are $561,000, okay, $561,000 per citizen. The liability per citizen today, $560,000.
And I know you do this all the time. And I don't, so I have to ask you, could you get a loan from a bank if that was... if you said, my assets are worth $500,000, but my debt is $500,000, would a bank loan you some money at a decent interest rate?
The sad thing is, I suppose it depends.
Okay.
It depends on what your
There's not a definite answer.
It depends on what your assets are and what your lending history is. And that, folks, what we left off the end of the last segment, that's why the debt ceiling is so important. Would a bank lend me money in that financial situation? The answer is it depends. Have I always made every payment on time as promised? If the answer is yes, they might lend me money. They might. They might not. Some banks would, some might not. But if I have a history of not paying the people that I owe, money that I owe them, am I now going to lend you money when you're in that financial situation? Whew, I don't think so.
So now let's incorporate this into the United States government.
Right.
We've always made our payments.
Yes.
So therefore, countries have continued to lend us money.
We'll keep lending you money.
Or let us buy things on credit, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, because you've always made your obligation.
Though, come June 1st, according to Treasury Secretary Yellen, we don't have any money and we don't make our payments, then all of a sudden we can't go to the rest of the world and tell them, well, it's okay for you to give us this stuff because we'll pay you later. They're going to say, well, no, because on June 1st, 2023,
you quit paying us.
You quit paying everybody, not just us.
Yeah,
everybody.
Yeah.
And so you are no longer a good credit risk for us.
This isn't like you owe somebody $500 either. You know, we owe a lot of nations a lot of money.
Okay, Justin, but I'm going to switch gears on just a little bit, okay? Mm-hmm. I understand all that. But daggone it, we owe so much money. Why don't we just cut what we spend? Why not just...
If we all owe this money.
Right. Or wait a minute. If we're going to, because the other side of this, and we just had a talk with one of our interns before we went on the show, and even he figured it out at 18, and that's no disrespect, but he said, well, you only have two choices. You either have to cut what you spend or you have to make more money. And I rang the bell. I said, ding, 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 you're right. But why don't we, the American people and or our politicians, get it? Because then I asked him, well, how do governments make money? And he said, well, you have to raise taxes. And I said, well, then what would happen to the politicians who raise taxes? He goes, well, they'd get voted out of office. Well, why would we do that, though? I mean, think about it. As the American people, why would we vote our leader out of office if they raise taxes if they're spending money on us and we don't want them to cut what they're spending on us? I mean, at some point, we have to be honest with ourselves. I guess this is where I'm coming from. It is because I have to be honest in my spending. I'm now on a fixed budget. I'm a retiree. Okay. I don't get Social Security, but I get a pension check that I've paid into. I'm on a fixed budget. So I have to watch what I spend. So why shouldn't the government watch what they spend? Or if I want the government to spend more money on me, then I should be willing to pay more in taxes. Why do we all, and this is harsh and don't get mad at me, but it's okay if you do, send me a message and I'll read it anyway and comment on it.
It's all right. I'll get mad at you.
But why can you have your hand out asking the government for more, but you don't want to pay more in taxes? You just said two of the biggest budget items are money going to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Now, not everybody who gets Social Security is an elderly person.
Right.
But the majority of them are.
The vast majority, yes.
But there are also the ones that are going to not vote for politicians if they get their Social Security or their medicine cut or raised. Yet I think they believe in that you should have to pay for what you get. I'm calling you out, old people. We can't do that, okay? That's not right for us to do that and then look at millennials and say, well, they just need to work harder and if they want to get the same things that I have. Because you're holding your hand out because your government needs more money or it needs to make cuts. And the major item that it spends on is are we old people. And yet you don't want to pay more in taxes. You're not being honest with yourself. If you're looking at other people and saying they need to work harder and they need to do this and they need to do that to get this, then so do you.
So
say something.
Well, I mean, I love everything you said.
Because now everybody just turned off, the podcast. Or maybe the young people are happy with me. I don't know.
The point though is,
but really, older people need to think about that, right? If you're walking up with your hand out, you can't cast aspersions at young people who are walking up with their hand out. You're doing the same thing. You're doing the exact same thing.
But I'm entitled to it.
Exactly. No, you're not.
I'm entitled.
You're not entitled to anything.
What?
And then you can say, well, I worked for it, or my husband or my spouse worked for it. Okay. But have you figured out, have you gotten more money out of Social Security than you put in? Because a lot of people have.
Well, we have to adjust for cost of living, Lance.
And I've been retired for 8 years and have gotten 0 cost of living raises.
Oh. Well, but you're a teacher. We don't care about them.
My point is, it can be done. And just because you're old and you vote doesn't mean that you shouldn't have to pay as well as everybody else. You're not entitled to anything else that no one else gets.
So what do we...
All I'm saying, just think about it, okay? You can be a hater and you can hate on me, but I also think you're pretty smart. And think about that, okay? You can get mad, but then stop and think about it and see if it doesn't make sense to you.
To give some clarity, I think that Lance and I would both say we must raise the debt ceiling. You say, well, wait a minute. You just talked about all this stuff and we shouldn't be No, I don't want us to be deficit spending. Raising the debt ceiling and deficit spending aren't tied at the hip. I mean, they are in that one is the cause of the other, but the answer isn't the debt ceiling. That doesn't fix anything. All it would do is send us into economic catastrophe to not raise it. That's it. If you want to fix things, there are other ways to do it. We've shared all of them on this show. That neither party likes all of these things that we say, and that's part of how you know that it's the right thing to do. So we're going to talk about some of the solutions and whether or not President Biden could just wave his magic wand, tap the 14th Amendment, click his heels together a few times, and make it happen. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. One of the biggest changes in the past 80 or so years is the percentage of the federal budget that Congress negotiates over. It used to be that they negotiated over a majority of all spending. And you would think so, given that it's, a budget, right? Isn't that what the budget is? I mean, think about when you walk in, right, to like a business and there's a budget on the table. Do they say when they're looking at the budget, well, we're just not going to look at this part of the budget. We don't care what that part says. We're just going to ignore this part of the budget. It doesn't apply. Usually that's not how that works, right? I mean, you have to look at everything. And what we do as a federal government is we just ignore the entitlement spending. Well, it keeps going up, but there's really nothing we can do about that. It just keeps going up. That's just how it is, Well, the problem now is that Congress is negotiating over such a tiny piece of the total budget. It makes it harder, right? I mean, in fairness to Congress, it makes it much harder to balance a budget when you can only negotiate 20% of the budget. So we've talked about one critical fix to this problem long-term. I mean, the immediate thing is raise the frickin' debt ceiling, right? I mean, sorry, but that's what has to happen. Raise the debt ceiling. Allowing us to default on our debt is stupid. That would be far worse than raising the debt ceiling. Far worse.
And far worse economically than even a bank shutting down.
Yes.
And those aren't good. But we've seen that in the last month. The banks, banks having to default.
It can happen.
And how we've all been scared of what that could mean. This would be a lot more catastrophic than that. So raise the debt ceiling. But
raise the debt ceiling. That's step one.
We need to talk about the 14th Amendment and some other solutions.
Yes. Step two is open up entitlements for negotiation, right? We have talked about solutions. There are solutions. Don't let anybody tell you there's not. We have talked about them on this show. There are ways to still take care of old people and fix the system for the next generation and quit our plan right now, which is to just spend until the programs die because of insolvency. So entitlements is a must, right? I mean, it's a must. Look at what's causing the problem, right?
Well, here's the thing.
It's a huge part of it.
One of the top four is interest on the debt. If you lower the debt, guess what happens to the interest?
It goes down.
It goes down.
So you don't have to pay as much in interest if there's less debt.
You get a double savings.
Yeah.
If you cut spending, you also cut the interest payment that you're making.
So the other things I'm packaging together, and I'll just let you react to them, Lance. Right now, the budget's negotiated annually, right? Congress almost never passes a budget on time, and it hasn't been balanced in, I don't know, quite a while.
But we've talked about that, right? And your solution has always been, and I don't disagree with it, but again, they have to do it, or we have to vote people in who will do it, that if they don't balance the budget by the first of the year, and they don't get it one passed, then they don't get paid.
Right.
And they get no back pay when they get it done.
Exactly.
So they would have worked now for 5 months without a paycheck. And once they find a solution, they're not going to get back paid for the last. They just worked for free for 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of your solutions that I absolutely love, is that if they can't get it done and that's their job, well, the rest of us don't get to keep our job if we don't get it done. So they can keep their job, but they don't get paid. And once they settle it, they don't get back pay. I bet that would change their attitude. And see, that's attacking Republicans and Democrats. We're not going after one party or the other. We're saying
it's collectively
all of you people
fault.
There are that's your job, is to balance the budget. So if you don't have it done by January 1, nobody gets paid.
Because, I was thinking about our intern in the studio is not mic'd up, but if we asked him, he's had some trouble getting to work. Do you get paid when you don't go to work? Is that how that works? Because I guess I didn't know that that's how it works. But apparently we're okay with our federal government, our representatives operating that way. It's okay for them to show up to work, not do their job, and get paid.
Right.
Or just not show up at all.
Oh, wait a minute. And where does that money come from? That's our tax money.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a savings. We can save tax dollars because we don't have to pay Congress because they didn't do their job.
Save some money. So, two-year budget, requirement of a balanced budget,
right?
And if there isn't if there's not a balanced budget submitted on time, you will not get paid until a budget is passed. And this last one is what I added last time. This is outside of No Label's scope of what they had put forward. You also become ineligible for re-election to the United States Congress.
Oh, bam. I like that one.
You're fired.
I don't know if that would go, but
you're fired.
Yeah.
We got 320 freaking million people in this country. We can find one of 435 to take your place.
I don't know, because look at what we have right now.
Well, yeah. So I don't know if
we could actually find anybody worth their salt.
Well, we'd have to, right? I mean, process of elimination here. But one of two things would happen, right, folks? We talk about if they can't do their job, then they shouldn't keep their job.
Right.
They shouldn't get paid for it if they can't do it. So why should we let them keep it?
Right. No, it's a good point. But we're running out of time. And in the title of the show,
14th
you mentioned the 14th Amendment. What's the 14th Amendment got to do with the budget?
Well, you're the historian.
I understand.
When we talk about the 14th Amendment, that has something to do with slavery?
Well,
isn't that usually what we're talking about?
That's when it was passed, after the Civil War, and it had to do with the rights of the people.
The rights of the people.
not being denied.
Okay. Well, it was ratified in 1868.
Right.
The 14th Amendment is obviously best known.
And it comes between the 13th Amendment and the 15th Amendment.
Yes. Yeah.
Which were ratified in 1865 and 1870.
Well, I don't know if we're willing to believe all that hokey pokey that the 14th comes between the 13th and the 15th, but we'll let our conspiracy theorists dig into that. So basically what it is, right, is it extends citizenship to former slaves and it guarantees equal protection of the laws, quote unquote, to all citizens.
Right.
That's what it's best known for. But there's this little provision that is a little more obscure and hasn't really been litigated very much. Litigated meaning it hasn't been taken to court very much. And that clause in Section 4 says the following, quote, "The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned." Now, why is that there? Because this is something that would inevitably come up in a case. I mean, what this says, right, is that the Constitution of the United States says that the validity of the public debt, which has been authorized by law, cannot be questioned. Well, if we default, it's going to be questioned, right? I mean, here's that logic. Now, why is this in here? I mean, why is this in the 14th Amendment? Well, the goal was to put pressure on the Confederate states to say, if you're doing things that are questioning our obligations to our debt, you are in open, violation of the Constitution.
Right.
In a simplistic version.
That's the historical content.
That's why it's there. That said, though, it is there and it's part of the Constitution. So some people have contended, some legal scholars, right, that even though the Supreme Court's never addressed this, that would give the executive branch, the president, the Treasury Secretary, the authority to just keep paying, because the Constitution says, and they take an oath to uphold the Constitution, that we cannot allow the validity of the public debt of the United States, which Congress has authorized. Congress has said, pay this stuff, right? I mean, they've already said, pay it, because this is just paying the debt that we already owe. It's things that Congress has already approved. It's not new spending. I think people always get confused by that. We already spent this money. We already owe this money. So it's our public debt and we owe people money. So could the president order the Treasury Secretary to say, based on the Constitution, you need to go ahead and pay this stuff?
But pay it with what?
Well, that's a good question.
I like it in that it puts pressure back on Congress.
Sure.
Where it's not going to fly, I think 2 reasons. One, these are the Democrats, which the people who don't like the Democrats are saying, oh, it's those stupid liberals. But again, if the Democrats can use it, then the Republicans get to use it when they get the Oval Office.
Right.
So to me, that's a mood issue, but that's where people
concerning.
would be. Right. Yeah. The second thing is, though, and it's the other political piece here, is the Supreme Court's not supposed to be political, but it sure seems like it is. And we've made a big deal out of it, not letting the Senate going back to Mitch McConnell, not letting President Obama put a nominee. Well,
not getting a vote
on his nominee.
He nominated somebody.
Right.
But
and so we've made it a very political process. I'm not sure that the Supreme Court would go along with this, even if President Biden did it. And you say, well, there's nothing historical about that. Oh yeah, go back to when, the very common one, FDR tried to pack the court and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. So, I mean, the 14th Amendment would make it interesting. It would give us something to talk about on the show.
Yeah.
It would. Hosting a podcast and being on the radio on national radio shows, it would be an interesting situation to discuss. I would love it.
Yeah. Not sure that it'd be
I'm
good
not sure it solves the problem, though, right?
No.
We're kicking the can down the road. We're just pushing it down again for another day instead of doing something to settle the issue right now. And we've backed ourselves up against the wall. We can't settle it now. So I agree with you. We need to raise the debt ceiling, and then we need to have some laws passed that holds our representatives accountable And notice I'm not saying the Senate because the Senate doesn't do money bills. It comes from the House.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing here, right, is that what the Democrats, and again, this is simplistic, the Democrats say, right, we don't think there should be any contingencies on raising the debt ceiling, right? We just have to raise it because that's the responsible thing to do. Blah, blah. We're taking the high ground. And the Republicans say, well, raising it and not making any cuts is irresponsible because that's why we're in the problem in the first place. But we're going to hold it hostage and we're not going to raise it at all. And we're just going to default if you don't do what we want. Also stupid and irresponsible. Both sides have a point. It is irresponsible to say that the debt ceiling should be contingent on some high-flung, quick, fast negotiation on spending cuts. It's also pretty irresponsible to say, well, we're just going to raise it and we're unwilling to talk about any way to prevent this from happening again.
And as I said to our intern, who gets hurt?
The people. Because they'll keep getting paid. They're essential.
And they'll get reelected because 92% of members of the House who run for reelection win reelection every 2 years.
Mm-hmm. It benefits them to fight. It hurts us. It's that simple. We've brought it down to that so many times. I don't know how many more times we'll have to do it, but we keep bringing it down to that. Benefits them, hurts us. They're preying on the people they represent, Democrats and Republicans alike. They should increase the debt ceiling immediately with, I'm fine with this, with a contingency that the debt ceiling will not increase again until Congress puts forward a balanced budget. We give a clear goal that Congress collectively, right, has to meet to raise the debt ceiling again. And nobody gets to play stupid the next time around on, oh, this snuck up on us. And, yeah, well, that's your job. So real tough. Why do we have this conversation today?
Well, first
was
of all,
there a reason?
Yeah, we did because we wanted
to entertain our intern
to generate some emails. And so email us at podcast@thestateofus.org. Let us know what you think.
Lance loves email.
But he
checks it multiple times a day.
All the time. Yeah.
On his flip phone.
What's my password? Okay. We did this because True Chat has a mission. And the mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And hopefully you thought we did that today. We thought we did it today, but let us know.
We did?
I think we did.
Okay.
And I'm the one speaking, so that's all that matters right now.
Unless Bradley cuts it out.
Yeah. Well, that's possible. But if you liked it and you tell your family and friends and coworkers and they liked it, they say, well, I want to listen to it firsthand. Tell them that they can find us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes heard on the weekends on over 24 AM and FM radio stations across the United States, parts of Canada. For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
Why, oops, you forgot who you were?
I thought that I needed to thank Bradley because I said his name too soon, and then I realized that happens.
Thinking about Bradley?
It happens after.
See, folks, I'm an afterthought, but I'm Lance Jackson. Now thank Bradley.
Nah. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.